You're listening to the Headless WP podcast, where we discuss all things Headless WordPress. The Headless WP podcast is a production of the WP Engine Developer Relations team. If you're interested in more content on Headless WordPress, check out developers.wpengine.com for blog posts, tutorials, videos, and more. All right, welcome to the Headless WP podcast. I am your host, Jeff Everhart, and I'm joined today by my always stoked co-host, Fran Agalto. And our guest with us is Daniel Roe. Daniel is on the framework team for Nuxt, a Vue-based full stack framework. Some of the most popular content we actually have on our website is based on Nuxt and Headless WordPress. So a new version of Nuxt, Nuxt 3, reached a stable release late in 2022. This new version comes packed with feature upgrades, and Daniel has graciously agreed to join us to help us learn a little bit more about this new version of an awesome framework. So Fran, Daniel, how's it going?
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
And
Yeah,
Jeff,
absolutely.
you know how I am. I am super stoked to be here. And also the other thing is I DM'd my good friend Jason Langsdorf he's doing Astro now. I think he's just a consultant there now. He used to work with me at Netlify, but I tend to copy the guests that he has on his Learn with Jason show. So I saw Daniel and I was like, oh, Daniel's like the Vue Nuxt dude. I want him on our show too. So thank you, Daniel. Stoked to be here.
Yes, exactly. And like I was telling Daniel this right before we hit record, like most of what you hear us talk about ends up being like focused on Next.js or React and stuff. And me, like I ignored React intentionally for so many years because Vue, I really found something that I enjoyed. And so I don't get to talk about Vue enough. So I'm really excited to have Daniel on the show. And Daniel, what we like to kind of ask everybody just as a way to kick us off and to learn a little bit more about your background. So, what did you do before web development, and what does that journey look like for you? How did you get into, web development and working on the Nuxt framework team?
Interesting question. So I think the first time I ever did anything web related, I was a teenager. I think I designed a website. My first paid thing was I used Dreamweaver, and I distinctly remember Microsoft front page being involved, and you sort of FTP'd stuff up somewhere, and I built a website which had heavy use of image maps. I can tell you this now, like the whole navigation was one big image map. For a fashion company going to New York, and that was really fun. So I was just a kid. I taught myself at that point. But then I went off to university and studied law, and did all kinds of other things. So in fact, my current foray into web development is much more recent. It was only really I've only been involved with Nuxt even for the last about 3 years.
Okay.
Which seems hard to believe. It feels like it's been a lot longer. But
the open source world moves fast.
It does,
so
exactly.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it feels like 10 years.
But yeah, so I had a small, I had started a small creative agency, and that's a whole story on its own. That was a complete change from what I was doing before. But I started a small creative agency helping businesses figure out how to communicate clearly. And because I had this interest in programming and so on in my background, we started offering design, and I'd do people's logo designs, and then we'd build their websites, and it was all in WordPress, I'll tell you that. And then
cool.
Absolutely. I'm on home turf now. Probably nothing of what I actually know is relevant anymore, but anyway,
it hasn't changed. In some ways, it hasn't changed that much. Like
okay. So, well, yes, we can explore that. But yeah, and then we started doing much more stuff with Nuxt, and I started helping out. We pivoted as a company into software as a service, sort of reverse acquired one of our clients, acquired one of our clients, but became them.
Oh.
If you know what I mean. And then when we shut down that startup, I was asked if I would like to be full-time on Nuxt. So I'm currently being sponsored actually to be full-time open source, which is amazing.
That's fantastic.
That is cool, man.
That is really cool.
And Daniel, it's awesome how you kind of segued and answered the second question, because I was going to ask you, do you have any experience in using WordPress? You obviously do. Now, do you have any experience using it in a headless fashion as well?
I do. So working directly with a WordPress API. And again, this might be one of the areas where my memory is a bit rusty. But yeah, I recall at one point, for example, we built a site, built a couple of sites, I guess, where clients had the CMS, so the WordPress was effectively their CMS. A lot of the WordPress sections, like the plugins you could install, really had no effect. All WordPress was doing was managing the content for the site. And then the front end was a Nuxt website. And I think we called the WordPress API at generate time, so it was even a static website. And anytime you changed the content on the site, we were then able to regenerate the static site. It was incredibly fast because there were no runtime calls to be made. But it was all powered by WordPress, running behind the scenes, and that of course was not static. That was running.
On the server. Yeah.
So the client had all the pros of the WordPress UI and an interface they're very familiar with, and then we had to obviously build out integrations for every possible taxonomy that we could legitimately express in the front end. We wanted to make it as close as possible so that tags and categories had meaning on the front end. So obviously you could make it extremely loose. And what else did I think we were able to do things like I think we had the redirection plugin. I forget who the author of it, but this is one redirection plugin that everybody uses. So
and I think it's called redirection actually.
Exactly. And I think we were even able to actually use those redirects in the actual CDN layer of where we were deploying the site. So it felt quite integrated, even though infrastructurally, it wasn't even running on the same hardware. But I think it worked quite well. And I've also used the WordPress API programmatically when doing other sorts of things. So needing to sort of pull down content. So I've got a bit of experience, but probably not nearly as much as you guys.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And I will say, like, you're spot on about the kind of plugin functionality, right? Like a lot of the stuff that wasn't made for using it headlessly. And some of that stuff I think is changing a little bit in the ecosystem. Like we're seeing more and more people either from the get-go really care about making their plugin usable via the REST API that's built into WordPress, or like writing their own bindings for WP GraphQL. I don't know if you've ever used that at all, but that sort of turns the WordPress database into, like a GraphQL API. Yeah, that's really neat. No, that's super cool. That's super cool. And that's actually really like one of my first introductions to headless WordPress as a thing, I think, was pretty much exactly what you were describing. I remember going to like a local meetup. Man, it must have been 2016, 2017 or something. It was like kind of like after WordPress had merged the API into core. I had just learned Vue at the time, and I had not heard about Nuxt yet, and went to this presentation that was, like, oh yeah, let's build a headless WordPress site. And I was already all in on Vue, and they were like, oh, there's this thing called Nuxt. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Exactly sort of that, I think we actually did use the generate command to make it all run statically, but it was just such a beautiful experience. And I just remember being blown away at how fast it all was. I was just like, this thing flies. It's so performant and so clean. And just, there's so many abstractions that Vue has that I love that, like I was able to bring into it, because I had spent so much time like trying to think about like, okay, well, how do I bring like a full-fledged Vue spa application inside of WordPress. And it was always just this like nasty kludgy thing that was really difficult to feel productive in. And it's like, then once you think about it that way, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I'll just make this totally separate thing. And WordPress just becomes an API for me. So I don't know, here we are. That's really cool.
So I'm the newbie in the house as far as comes to Nuxt and Vue. And you know, the next question I kind of want to, and maybe you can guide me in put on your professor hat on, if you will, Daniel, for me, because I kind of learned in parodies on, hey, I've used this already. Daniel, can you tell me what this equals to this? So for example, like if I'm using Next.js, right, and I've been one of many of developers in our industry who've been dragging and kicking and screaming having to use React, because it's a love-hate out there. Some devs love it, some devs actually loathe it. So with that being said, Vue and Nuxt, would you say, like from a straight parody standpoint, Nuxt is to Vue what Next is to React? Let's start there. Is that a fair say?
So obviously you have to compare Next and Nuxt, because the name, at the very least, like even if you didn't know anything of the history of Nuxt, you'd be thinking, why are these two names so similar? And as far I think I can probably say pretty canonically, despite not being there at the time, that that Nuxt was started soon after Next. And I think the U in Nuxt is for Vue, if the E in Next is for React. So initially, at the very least, it is it's a framework which does similar things to Next, or did similar things. The two frameworks have diverged quite a lot over time, and we've even had convergent evolution in some ways. So more, it's all very interesting. So for example, just our last release last week, we sort of released Composable, which allows a certain kind of way of defining SEO data. And actually just
a
couple of days ago, Next released something extremely similar. I'm sure not at all affected, but we are sort of, because we're in the same space, we are sort of evolving in similar directions. In some cases, not. In some cases, we are going differently. But you're absolutely right to compare us. Next and Nuxt are similar kinds of things. I would say Nuxt is a framework for building web apps built on Vue. It's a full stack framework, so it's not just about the front end. It has a server component too. And we've just finished a rewrite for Nuxt 3. And a lot of some of what I'll say is particularly true of Nuxt 3. So Nuxt 3 is built to be platform agnostic. It runs in pretty much any platform, and the ones it doesn't are because we haven't yet sort of added the adapter for it, not because we don't want to. So it runs in Cloudflare, Vercel, Netlify, anywhere you might think. And it does so natively, and in most cases, as much as possible, we want it to be zero config. Oh, and I should say like AWS Lambda, and it runs on Dino deploy. And I'm not stopping because I've run out of places it deploy. So it's really sort of re-architected. The server bed is re-architected to be how would we build a framework, a server, if we were designing it to be for today, and for the way that things can be today. So lots and lots about that is about how you build a server if it needs super fast cold start. So it changes how you think about what the server should be. It's not that you want lots of upfront cost in terms of startup. Actually, you want as minimal cost startup and then incremental cost as you need to load additional JavaScript into memory, for example, that kind of thing. Sorry, I'm getting into the weeds. Basically,
no, that's what we're here. We love the weeds. And that's awesome. I mean, because like I feel like the multi. Sorry, Fran.
No, you're good. No, this is cool. Yeah.
The multi-deployment, I don't know, whatever you want to call that, like multi-target deployment strategy, like you see popping up everywhere. And I think that's so neat that it's like we're no longer kind of constrained to just these node servers, right? We can have all of these different environments and to see frameworks targeting them in this way, like, because you do it, I know, like Remix does it, Astro to some degree, like there's tons of adapters and all these different ways that you can deploy it, and especially with something like Quick and stuff like that. So it's really cool to see that happen. And like I'm glad we're like moving away from this like competition thing, like which one's better, and like everybody is really just taking the best ideas and saying, you know what, that makes a lot of sense, like we should all do something like this. And you just kind of see like the bar incrementally get better and better across all of these different tools.
I think, I mean, particularly over the last few months, maybe year, I mean, I'm just seeing such great discourse in the JavaScript front end community. Like there's been a lot, there are a lot of people that who are you know, building frameworks out there, libraries, who are just a delight to sort of talk to and work with. You know, we're trying to make the world generally a better place. I think we're trying to make it better for developers, for end users. It's nice to feel part of that. And open source, of course, can be, certainly as in my experience, you know, a great place, because it's a place powered by people helping other people, which makes for something really nice. So yes, it's totally good when we're able to sort of spur each other on and help us get better, even when it's even when, you know, you have a bit of an oh shucks moment that they got there first.
They got there first.
Yeah.
You know, you sort of think, oh goodness, my in progress demo for X, it's not going to be quite the groundbreaking thing that I thought it was going to be, but that's fine, of course. It's you've got to hold these things lightly. So it's a good.
I do want like a quick side weed thing that Jeff, you might even be able to answer, but so I'll throw it to both of y'all. Thinking about data fetching and the ways I data fetch in Next.js with get static props, get server side props, and ISR, and setting up dynamic routes with a bracket syntax. Very similar in Vue, yes? In Nuxt, is there like a function, like that helps me server side render or statically site generate?
Yes. So those things are very similar.
Okay.
In Nuxt 2, there was a slightly different syntax for dynamic router params, but Nuxt has always had file system based routing from the very early days, and also always had layouts and things like that, which have only come a bit more recently to Next. Now we actually even have square brackets, just like Next. So that you'll be very familiar with that. That will feel totally this is the same. It's a little bit different for server-side data fetching. So we have a composable strategy. So rather than having an export from your file, from your page, which defines a function that's going to return the paths of the routes and a way of sort of getting the static data for the routes, which then gets passed to your page. In Nuxt, any component at all, and then by the way, this is all unique to Nuxt, so this is not generally true across Vue, although there are lots of Vue frameworks and other frameworks too with the same file system routing stuff. It's true. Okay. But for data fetching in Vue, in Nuxt, you and any component at any level in your app can register a data, a use async data call. And this use async data composable is going to do a couple of things. It's going to perform data fetching. So in an app which is not statically generated, doesn't have any static component, it's just going to fetch that for you, and it's going to manage the state and give you an error status and a pending and all of that composable goodness that you can use to build a UI around it. But when you statically generate a page, all of those get packaged up into a single payload for you automatically, and that payload gets generated alongside your page. So when you then navigate to that page, the payload is fetched, pulled into memory, and all of those components, instead of performing the request, pull their data from the payload. So it's a bit different from how it works in Next. In fact, quite different. So Next is very much sort of top down. So you fetch it all at the page level, and then you pass it into the components, or you set a context or something like that.
That's right.
Whereas in Nuxt, you sort of, it's very much at the bottom. Like you could have a deeply nested component that needs some piece of data. And actually, you could have more than one component that needs the same piece of data. And actually, you can sort of deduplicate it by a key, or you can use a composable strategy. So you could have some data, like think of a React hook. It's different in terms of how it works, but it looks a little similar. Any exports you put in a couple of magic directories in Nuxt called composables and utils get auto-imported anywhere you use them in your app. So it's a really easy way of taking logic that you're repeating, put it in one place, and then you can use it in multiple places. And if you do that with the data fetching, it gets automatically deduplicated. So if you have a couple of components that all need the same piece of data, and you're generating your page, it will be one piece of data that is shared across all three of those components.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And so like I actually had somebody ask me a question that is very similar to that, because it sounds like Nuxt supports like better like co-location of, your data fetching code inside of your component, where this, I think they were like a React dev, and they're in client side React. I think that's something that people do quite often, right? Is I've got my data fetching code inside of my component, and each component's responsible for fetching its own data, where they were coming over trying to do in a statically generated next page. And I'm like, no, well, like if you want this data in here, like it's got to all be passed in through these props, and kind of then you drill it down into whatever component you need.
I do love that about Vue, by the way, the co-location, the fact that you have that single file with the script.
That's cool, man. Yeah, that is cool.
So, I mean, in fact, whenever I've sort of dipped my fingers in the Next world, or in the React world in general, I always try as much as possible to recreate that.
Yeah.
So, because I like CSS, yes, styled components. I get how it works, but I like CSS. I mean, I want to be writing CSS. Yes, I want it to be nested. For goodness sake, that I'm on board with. Post CSS, I think I can have, but I want to have a CSS module or something that I import, and I want it to be right next to my. If I can't have it in the same file, I jolly well want it right next to it. So you can actually have the sort of the logic and the template and the CSS there together, but it's not always quite as straightforward as that in the React world. But the Vue, you do. I mean, you can write Vue components in TSX, JSX, or whatever. But
yeah,
I think
that's cool.
There's magic you can do with a compiler as well, with a single file compiler. So and performance optimizations as well. Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, and I think the single file components honestly were one of the first things that really drew me to Vue, where I was just like, this is just so simple. And I had come from, I think, more like an Angular JS background, where there were like sort of directives all over the place, right? So I was kind of used to this magical HTML, if you will, anyway. And Vue just really reinforced that for me. And I think it's just such a nice developer experience. I think like Svelte might have tried to implement pieces of that. And I know Astro has a similar flavor, where you can just sort of, you've got a script, you've got some HTML, and then you've got your style tag that you can open and do all that stuff in the same file. So there is one question that I kind of have as a Vue developer that maybe you could help shed some light on. So like, I know now and maybe this came in Vue 3, right? The composition API versus the options API. So I don't know if you could like dig into what those are, like when should a developer use them? So I think the options API, right, is kind of what, anytime you see me write Vue, Fran, it's the options API, right? I've got this kind of configuration object inside of my script tag, where it's got, maybe, the observable pieces of my data, methods that my component can access, and then like lifecycle hooks, where I know that the composition API is quite a bit different. And so, yeah, I don't know if you could like elaborate on that a little bit. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the big things moving from Vue 2 to Vue 3, and something that was quite divisive originally. So when it was first proposed, people were saying, "Oh, this is going to be the death of Vue. It's going, I for one am going to switch frameworks. You know, it was a really big uproar. I think Evan managed it quite well in terms of listening to people, taking feedback on board, making sure that the transition wasn't what people feared. I don't think he was intending to, but it was very well done. And actually, at the moment, whenever I'm at a whenever I've seen people ask the question, you know, how many people are using Composition API versus Options API, the vast majority are using Composition API now. So what is it? What is it? So basically, the reactivity in Vue is a thing on its own. So you can have a reactive value, and the idea is when you change that value, then things that depend on it also have to be updated too. And so this is the essence of a lot of reactive frameworks. And so in Vue 2, you have everything is really component driven. There was Vue observable that you could access and sort of construct stuff under the hood, but mostly people accessed it through components. So in a given component, you would have some reactive data, you would have some properties that were computed from that data, you would have some methods, and you would have, you know, watchers and so on. But it was all component related. Whereas the Composition API said, well, what if we could take that, all the same things, data, computed properties, watchers, methods, and just disconnect them from the component? What if they could be sort of standalone methods and utilities that you can use to create composables, bits of logic that can stand on their own and live in a shared utils folder, for example, and somehow get used in different places. And so there was this new setup function that was introduced. And in a setup function, you could use all these new composables. Vue has a concept of Vue 3 has this concept of the instance. So immediately before calling the setup function, Vue says, hey, the current instance is this one here. And so now when you use any of those utilities, Vue knows they're all related to this component that's running the setup function. As soon as the setup function finishes, we unset the instance and move on to the next one. But basically, you get the benefit of being able to write code that isn't coupled to the component. But when it's run, it still lives in that component instance. Yeah. So this has been a real transformative move. And actually, that setup function started as just one lifecycle method in a whole component object. So actually, you probably could actually use still the methods in the computed key and other stuff as well as a setup function. But basically, almost everything that mattered started to happen in that setup function. And now the most common way people are using Vue is with a script setup block. So you don't have a script block where you export a default object, which is the component, which has a method called setup.
Yep.
You just have a block, and everything in that block is the setup function. And the compiler is able to, normally you would, from a component function, you would return the values that are exposed to the template. And which is nice also, because you basically can encapsulate data which isn't exposed, and you can deliberately expose certain things. In the script setup block, you can, the compiler figures it out for you, basically. And we have some really great tooling with Volar that will actually give you full TypeScript support for this in your template. In your HTML, you get that as well as in the script. So you can fully type check your Vue 3 project like right the way through. It's great. And actually it powers not just VS Code, but NeoVim and all kinds of other IDEs and editors. And it looks like it might actually start to become framework agnostic as well, even though it started out. Cool. So it's check Volar out. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, and I just remember looking, I would just doing some research for this podcast, looking through the thought behind that switch, like from the Options API to the Composition API. Like, I do like that they've preserved the Options API and it's really sort of opt-in. Like, I think that's important for any technology moving forward, is like not to leave people in the dust. But I feel like, was there like some sort of eye tracking study that they did to like really look at how much people had to jump around with the Options API versus, you know, the Composition API? Because it's just seemed like you took a whole bunch of boilerplate and structure and like just minimized it so well. It was really cool to see.
I don't know about any study, but I wouldn't surprise me. And
Okay.
actually, even when you throw the script setup, when you throw the script setup block in, the change is even more striking. And that's even if you're just talking about a single component and not talking about the idea of shared things that can be used by multiple components. And the moment you do that, Vue 2 had the concept of mixins, but mixins weren't typed well. So you could be effectively, you could think of it like sort of stacking components on top of each other. And so they could all have the same lifecycle hook, and effectively they would all get called, but they could also all have different methods. And so they would sort of be merged, different data properties, which would also be merged. So everything was on the same flat surface, which meant it was easy to collide. So if you had a data property called, value or something, easily overwritten by something else, it was really hard to know what was exposed because it was all in a mixin. It wasn't visible to you as an author. And I think there were some other issues as well. And but the composition API solves those because you're in your own composable. You can do something like register a callback when the component is mounted. You can also have internal state, which never is exposed to the end user. Just within your composable, you set up the internal state, and then maybe you watch it, and then you give the user, like think of a toggle. You have your state, which is the toggle's value. You don't expose that to the user directly, not mutably. What you expose to them is a computed that tracks the current value and a method to toggle it. And so that's all the user needs. That's the API they need. But you internally have more stuff. And maybe when they toggle it, you then store it in local storage so that the next time it's you load the page, you can load it in. And you can do all of that. That's internal. The user doesn't need to know that. They just have to focus on the API, which you expose to them. That's a much nicer way. Think if everything else you were doing, every internal property you had to get exposed on the component that was using it. That would be a bad thing and a recipe for disaster as your users figure out, oh, if I change this underscore internal value for whatever, it works.
Crack open the Vue dev tools and cause
man, it's cool. Jeff, I think this is making me think we need a Nuxt.
I'm definitely going to have to redo our Nuxt tutorial for sure. Because I think we're the one we have on our site right now is for Nuxt 2, so we'll definitely need to redo that.
We're gonna have to update that. Yeah.
But that definitely blends. So we talked a little bit. Thank you so much for all those extra Vue details.
That's cool.
But so let's talk a little bit more specifically about Nuxt. Because I obviously used it for a few projects a while back, and enjoyed Nuxt 2 for sure. So what's really changed from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3?
Well, one of the things that I always say about Nuxt, which I haven't actually said so far, is that I think the philosophy behind Nuxt, at least from my point of view, is that it should be extremely simple to use. So the idea is the best practices should be baked in. So you should benefit from them. You shouldn't need to do the hard things in terms of getting set up, but it should also be fully customizable as you go. And this is one of the differences between Nuxt and Next, for example. So Nuxt has a modules ecosystem, which is amazing and really incredible. So the community has created lots and lots of modules hooking into different bits we expose from the framework itself. And it means that Nuxt is not a monolith in any way. We can't just move. We can't just change. We have to commit to APIs. The move from 2 to 3 was a big move, and not one that I'm keen to repeat at any point again, because I guess like in some ways the move from Vue 2 to Vue 3 is also not a move I would be keen to repeat again. And a lot of the changes in Nuxt 3 are, similar to the changes that happened in Vue 3, and they almost had to happen. So there have been API changes in terms of how you interact with Nuxt from the point of view of modules. from the point of view of users, if you're getting started in Nuxt 3, I think a lot of things should be pretty intuitive. But Jeff, if you unpack it, if you haven't already, then let me know if things aren't. So Nuxt 3,
That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
What's changed? So I think one of the things people notice is that it's type safe. So it's not just that Nuxt itself is written in TypeScript and that all of the internal utilities are typed, but we are also able to do a lot of fun stuff for you in your project. So when you're making internal API calls to your own endpoints, we can autocomplete them for you in your editor. And we can actually give you typed return types for those fetch calls.
Oh, wow.
We actually know what the return type is. Or if you add a module to your Nuxt config, we automatically add its types so that you then get type safe access to the module options when you're configuring it. Or if you add a middleware to your project or a layout, when you're selecting the layout and middleware in your page, you again get type like autocomplete drop down in your editor for what the possible middleware or layouts would be. Or with your runtime config, when you say, hey, this is something that I want to be overridden at runtime, you get, again, type safe access to that in your app. So when you're accessing config dot whatever value, it gets dropped down. You know, is it a Boolean? Is it a string? What is it? And that is true for lots and lots of things throughout the app. Actually, even in terms of network requests, we recently landed a PR upstream in Nitro. I think we still need to fully implement it in Nuxt that gives you parameter, like type safe method access. So a get request to one endpoint might return something different than a put request to that same endpoint. And we actually reflect that in the typings that you get within your app. So there's lots and lots of interesting stuff that we're able to do by having a different approach to TypeScript. And it's very much in service. It's not just this is cool, but hopefully this is in service of a better DX. So again, you'll hopefully find that things are being surfaced for you and mean that you don't need to go back and switch between things quite so much as you otherwise might.
That's awesome. I think anytime you can make that stuff more intuitive for people, there's no real downside. You touched on Nitro a second. Could you elaborate on what Nitro is?
Yeah, sure. So Nitro is what we're calling the new Nuxt server. So it's this this optimized layer that can be then deployed anywhere to any different provider. And it is so there's some things about it that are worth saying. So one is as I said, it was meant to be universal. That means it has no runtime node dependencies.
Okay.
Nuxt itself runs in Node. It's a Node build tool, but what it outputs isn't. So in a project I was building recently, I don't know if are you Mastodon fans? Maybe not.
I don't think we've made it over there yet.
I haven't made it over there yet, Daniel. Yeah.
But should I? If you're hanging out there, I might need to.
There? I'll go. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the water's warm. But a few of us built an app called Elk, which is built in Nuxt and some other things. So check it out, elk.zone.
Yeah, I want to see it. Yeah.
Okay. And well, actually, you can visit it even if you're not logged in or have an account on Mastodon, and you'll see the public feed of a server that I actually I'm one of the people who runs. But you'll get a feel for what it looks like. Obviously, a lot of stuff you can't see until you actually do log in. But yes, so Mastodon it's another social network. What was I saying?
We're talking about Nitro, I think.
That's right. And so actually for the native app for Elk, we couldn't run a server at all. So actually we pull Nitro into the browser. So we actually even were able to have this Nitro server layer running in the browser. Think Express in the browser.
Yeah.
And it's able to actually handle incoming requests and do interesting stuff like that. So it's universal. It can run anywhere. It can run in a service worker. Your entire Nuxt app can be rendered in a service worker in your own browser. And actually have like a renderer which is shared between tabs. Now that is probably not something I would recommend because that's not the most sturdy of deployment options.
But you can if you want to.
If you want to,
it's possible.
I mean, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So let me. Oh, sorry. Go
Man,
ahead.
wow, that's cool.
I could go on forever, so you must interrupt.
No, I just kind of, I just want to unpack a little bit just for my own understanding, because this sounded cool, and I think this was an important distinction. So Nuxt still requires Node to build, right? You need to have Node installed on your machine to run. I forget what the command was, but like generate or something like that, to then create this Nitro executable that then has no runtime dependencies, can be deployed everywhere. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
And because that was one of the initial things that struck me when I was we recently did like a framework guide that was really like, how do you deploy this thing on our like hosting platform? Yeah. And it did seem like there was it seemed a little bit more complicated, but now like I understand why. It wasn't as simple as, npm run start or something like that. But now I understand why, right? Because we don't want Node there. Like we just invoke this JavaScript file and you get all the goodness wherever you're at. So that's really cool.
So, I mean, the default Nitro output is Node server, but there are lots of others as well. But it is standalone. So if you were building a Nuxt 2 app, you'd run your build, and then you might install just the production dependencies. You might sort of purge the dev ones. But you still need Nuxt as a dependency. It's a runtime dependency. Or there was a Nuxt start dependency, which just had the server and not like Webpack, which is probably you don't want in production. But that's not true with Nuxt 3. So with Nuxt 3, it generates a folder by default called .output. And that .output folder can be taken anywhere. It doesn't have it has all the Node modules inside that it needs. It has the server, it has everything. So it is very optimized, and it's something cool. Like the size of that folder is like a 50th of the size that that the Nuxt 2 like production Node modules was. So it's tiny, a 50th. It's minuscule. Like the cold start went from the bare bones Nuxt 2 project was 300 millisecond cold start. Whereas the bare bones Nitro cold start project is like 3. So it is incredibly
fast.
Wow.
And part of that is that all the Nitro server does by default is I say all, it does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is connect these different endpoints. So, and they can make local calls to each other, for example, which bypass the network layer. So we don't need to we mock that, we pretend to be a network layer, but you can when you're rendering your Vue page, for example, and you hit your own API, we don't have to make a real network request, which will slow down the rendering of that page. We can actually hit the API as though it's a direct local function that is just in the scope of that component. But I mean, we mock it, so we make it seem like it's we give it there's a request and response object and all the things that you would expect. So if you are in that handler, it feels like home, but it's so much faster. And so anyway, there are lots of really cool things that we've been able to do with Nitro. It's also everything is code split, so it uses dynamic imports to load in only the code for the endpoints that are required. So if you can have lazy initialization if you need to. So if you have some task that needs to happen before something, some endpoint happens, Nitro supports that too. So you need a connection to a database that's going to happen once, but only once before the first request to something. Again, we can make that happen with no boilerplate. And a lot of the same things are true with the Nitro side of the app. So you have the same kind of dynamic file-based routing. So you can use dynamic parameters.
Oh man!
All of that is there for the server. Lots of nice goodies from the Nitro side.
Yeah, that does sound awesome. So like so and we said that supports the edge already. I'm just referencing back on my questions, trying to stay in the weeds for a second while we're here. So yeah, all right, that all sounds amazing. Could you talk for us a little bit about like what kind of rendering modes are available in Nuxt. And I know I saw maybe like the possibility of combining different render modes is in the works.
So we moved, so with Nuxt 2, this was a little bit complex as well. The question was often, well, what mode are you in Nuxt 2? Because you could be in server SSR mode or not. And you could have a target server or target static, and all of these things, and it was a little complicated, I will grant you. But it was also global. And in Nuxt 3, you can have a global, is this SSR or not? But in general, almost everything that you configure is root specific. There's a concept called root rules. So you can say, do I want these roots to be SSR'd or not? Do I want, or this root, do I want that to be pre-rendered? Or this route, do I want it to have a stale while we validate strategy? Like maybe like the Next.js experience that you're having. And actually this one I want in the background to be revalidated. And that's going to then work in any environment. In Node, it will work just as well. But if it's deployed, for example, on Vercel or Netlify, who have support for the SWR at the CDN level, it will take advantage of that at the CDN level. And so, but that's all at the, and you can even define headers or turn on cores or set up redirects, all via root rules. And those work with very, very minimal configuration because they're not complex rules. And then whatever provider you're using, they output the right kind of file or the right kind of server to make that happen with that provider. So you don't have to learn intricacies of like even Netlify's redirects or headers file. It just is done for you on Nuxt. You don't have to figure, not that it's complex on Netlify, but it just is done. And you don't have to learn the Vercel build output API. It's not meant for end users to consume anyway, I guess. Like we're trying to abstract all that away.
Yeah, that's really cool. That route by route, specificity is really neat in my mind, and I think just makes everything super flexible for people. Because I know I've run into that where, and also I think, isn't there some element, and maybe Nitro does this, like where it's kind of hard to tell where if are you in the client, are you in the server, like what's available to me there? Does Nitro patch any of that stuff for you? Maybe I'm not.
That is true, and that is something that I think we can make better. Because at the moment in your app, we tell you these things are available globally. They can be auto-imported, but that does mean it's possible in your Nitro endpoint to think, oh, I can use a Vue composable, because you're used to using it in your Vue endpoint, and your editor still thinks it's globally available, and you put it in, and you get an error. This isn't defined because it's not auto-imported into your server routes. It is a different context. And I think we can make that better. We're talking a little bit about maybe making use of some TypeScript features to possibly establish a different kind of context for the server directory, as opposed to the rest of the app. But that adds quite a lot of complexity. And anyway, that's work in progress. So, but that is definitely something that we could get better at, in terms of, you might be in a portion of your code base that can't use the Vue stuff you use everywhere else. But the rule is pretty simple. It's the server folder where that is true. And what we're doing is, as much as possible, trying to name things, name the composables, so that it's clear whether or not they're in the Vue part or not. All the Nitro composables need to have an event, the request event passed to them. Whereas in the Vue part of the app, they all hook into they use the same kind of instance context. The idea that they know where they are and what the next instance is just by being called in the right place. And so they don't need to have anything passed into them. So it's, yeah, but that is something I think we probably could make a bit better.
I'm looking at your...
It seems like a very tough problem to solve, right? Yeah. So what does the Nuxt ecosystem look like right now? Like, so if I wanted to implement auth, like a package that does auth for me or some other features, like what do options look like for users there?
So there's great great support in the Nuxt 3 ecosystem. There are lots of modules that exist that are new ideas people are riffing with or implementing in Nuxt 3 first, without a Nuxt 2 module. There are lots of modules in the Nuxt 2 ecosystem that aren't needed now in Nuxt 3 because actually we have built-in support. And I'm really pleased with where we are right now. So auth, for example, there's a great community-led project by Sidebase, which is they've called it, I think, maybe a little bit confusingly Nuxt auth, but or maybe it's Sidebase auth. That might be a bit. But basically, they have a really great approach. They've wrapped Nuxt auth, which is, despite the name, a provider agnostic, just so that you can actually use all of the drivers providers for Nuxt auth in Nuxt. So that's great, and I think are already in communication with Auth.js to implement it as a Auth.js adapter. So your choices for auth are pretty good. And a lot of times auth doesn't have to be complex. You don't actually even need a library for it. Right. But it's totally up to you, of course. There are choices out there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think of other cool things out there I've seen. So like, obviously we work for a WordPress company. So if you're going to use a CMS, maybe use WordPress. But I know that there was also like a Nuxt content sort of like file-based CMS. I don't know if that's worth talking about at all. That seems kind of neat.
Yeah, so Nuxt content, it's definitely neat. It's for Markdown based content. So you and not only I think you can have JSON and other kinds as well, but the idea is that it lives in your version control system. And so it's possible to write pages, your content of your website in Markdown. Often this is great for documentation-based websites.
Yeah.
And
we know all about that.
We know about that. Yeah.
What's your docs all in Markdown?
Yeah, they're all in MDX files.
MDX,
and it's like not natively. I'm not a super. It just isn't my favorite setup. We didn't make the site, but it's sort of like ingest those directly from GitHub, and our site is Next.js. It ingests them directly from GitHub and then parses them, renders them. But it's like two separate repos, so it just becomes hard to manage. And so having something that's all just like in one repo for all, the site and the docs would be nice for us.
That's
I feel like I was gonna say, Daniel, I feel like it specifically a use case for writing content in Markdown would be docs, but if just throwing it out there for shits and giggles, like if I was writing a blog and I just didn't want to mess with WordPress or anything and just really wanted to just write my stuff in Markdown in a blog, that's okay too, right, y'all? I mean,
totally.
Okay.
I think, I mean, I think the question when you're choosing a CMS, there are lots of factors, and one of the most important is obviously who's using it. So so at the moment the choices are if you're writing your content in Markdown, I think probably this is not going to be, this might be more targeted at the developer audience. There's Netlify CMS is fantastic, great standalone. Also, I mean, I'm sure you know this, but not everyone might know that Netlify CMS is not hosted by Netlify. It's an app that you can use yourself. I mean, it's not part of the platform and it's not paid. It's incredible. It's a way of, it integrates with your own Git repo and allows you an interface to editing Markdown. There's also Nuxt Studio. I don't know if you've come across this.
No.
Nuxt, no. What is that? I want to look it up now. Nuxt Studio.
It is a Git-based CMS, which has just been announced, and and put out there by Nuxt Labs,
Okay.
which is a company that's been started by the people who founded Nuxt. So Sebastian and Alex Chopin. And that's under development. But that's definitely worth checking out.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that does look cool.
That looks pretty cool, actually. Yeah.
And it's interesting to see that like they started Nuxt Labs too. Like I feel like there's so many open source projects who are like trending toward that model.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to see.
I think what was the other switching a web app or site use case here to ecom? Didn't Vue launch a thing like Shopify had React Hydrogen? Vue had like some kind of, is it Storefront? Is it Vue Storefront?
There is a Vue Storefront. Yeah.
Did you work on that, Daniel, perchance, the Storefront thing?
I didn't. No. I'm not part of this Vue Storefront team.
Okay.
But that was built on Nuxt though. So Vue Storefront was built on Nuxt 2. And I believe they're migrating to Nuxt 3 at the moment.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
but yeah, so Vue Storefront is absolutely now I don't know. Does Vue Storefront have an adapter for WordPress?
I actually looked the other day and it's not listed on their integrated headless CMSs. And I was like, oh, I need to fix that on a long enough timeline.
Well, I think it should be possible.
Certainly should.
If it's not, I bet there are people doing it already. But
there's one developer in our Discord, Scotty Kennedy. What is he working on? I think it's Nuxt, maybe. Yeah,
Nuxt. It is Nuxt. WooCommerce.
He did
Nuxt,
one, based on WooCommerce and Nuxt. I think his is actually Nuxt 3 because it was released relatively recently. So like it's definitely possible. And I went and looked at Vue Storefront one day and was like, oh man, I need that. Put that on my list of like outreach. Yeah, exactly. Because it should be on there. I guess both as a CMS. I mean, and technically, like doing what Scotty's doing, that's the CMS, but also the e-commerce platform as well, using WooCommerce. So it's really could be both. Although I have a feeling that the e-commerce part, just from our experience in WooCommerce, is a little bit more challenging. But like to speak to that ecosystem, there's a lot of developers who are like, building things like Scotty. There's another product called Copart that is like, building a better WooCommerce API layer, for example, that you can tap into. So it's cool to see some of that stuff happen.
Nuxt is great, by the way. Like it's beautiful as well as but I guess partly what I was saying about choosing a CMS is that it really matters who your users are. And I know, from my time in agency world, that, anyway, I think that there are just a lot of choices. So you might find that Nuxt content is right for you, but it might also not be right. So it's good to have options out there.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. If we ask a marketer to write Markdown, they will probably stab us.
They would, they would, yeah. A marketer has told me, Fran, I don't want to.
Yeah,
this is a terrible experience for me. I don't want to write Markdown. No.
Yeah, but and I just realized we're pushing up on the top of the hour. Yeah, so let's. If you've got just a few minutes, Daniel, we got maybe just 2 more questions for you. Is that all right?
That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll skip forward and definitely look out. I'll be dropping some Nuxt content here in the next month or so. So if you're listening, want some updated way on getting started, I'll do that. So this is a question I like to ask everybody, and it's great because you have a little bit of WordPress experience already. So if you could wave a magic wand, what is one change you would make to WordPress to make it better for headless developers, or what would make it better for people who want to use it with Nuxt?
Well, I don't know about headless or Nuxt, but I'll think about that in a second. But absolutely, one thing that I would do is make the roots stack default. I would absolutely have this be the way WordPress is. Dependencies should be managed by Composer. Like as much as possible, just take Bedrock and make that WordPress. That is what I would say as an absolute first step. And if people aren't familiar with it, Roots is just incredible. Roots.io.
Yeah.
Anyway, I absolutely loved that way of both building and deploying. I think to make it better for headless developers, I think I've struggled often sort of registering types for custom taxonomies and things. So particularly when developers have their own, maybe they've had an agency build something and they have an existing data set, existing plugin set, lots of data is in there, but it's maybe being looked after in a slightly different way under the hood. It would be nice to be able to expose things to the API in a lot easier way. Maybe this is just my own lack of experience speaking, but I think that could be really nice. And what else? Oh, I mean, obviously, it would be nice if you were able to write some of the Gutenberg blocks in Vue. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah,
but I was sort of.
Oh,
would be
so
cool.
I knew that you were going to say that. Yeah.
I don't know if it would. I think you do. There is kind of like a hard React dependency there, which I was really disappointed. And there was a second, I remember, before they had gone all in on Gutenberg, where React had like changed their licensing structure. And for a second, Matt Mullenweg was like, maybe we're going to look at Vue. And I've never been so ecstatic. I was like, oh, please do it. Like, please do it.
But
and
they
it
went
didn't
in
happen.
React, yeah. They want to know.
Yeah.
React component.
Yeah. So no, that would be really cool. That I don't think we're going to get to, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
No, those are all awesome suggestions. Yeah. And Fran's got one question to wrap us up.
The last question to wrap us up, y'all. And this is Fran's fun question. But here's the thing is I think Daniel actually just does also code for fun. So besides coding, Daniel, what do you like to do for fun? Do you rock climb on your spare time, or you said you had to put a kid out? Are you a father? Tell us a little bit about what you do to decompress from code.
Yeah, good question. Good question. So I am a dad. Yep, I've got a 3-year-old son who is absolutely lovely. And so a lot of my day, basically a lot of the day that is not coding, is spent sort of playing with him and around when he's around. So I'm with him most mornings when he wakes up, or rather he wakes up and then then I wake up afterwards. But we then sort of go and cuddle and sort of guess his milk and stuff like that. So it's fun. One thing I am looking forward to this year, which I think probably is one of the things I love most in the world, which I didn't do last year and maybe not for a couple of years, is ski. I'm going to a conference later this year, later in February, and 2 days of talks and then 2 days of skiing, and I am honestly so stoked. That is sort of dream life outside of code.
That's cool.
Daniel, where's the conference at?
It's in Austria, in Dornbirn.
Okay.
Are you thinking of coming? Come.
I was thinking maybe if I could get WP Engine to pay for me and Jeff to meet you there.
If there's snowboarding, I'm there. That's been my
I'm down for snowboarding. Yeah.
We moved to Florida, and I haven't snowboarded this year, and I was like, oh man, I really miss this. So
is this a Vue-conf? Is this like
no? It's not a Vue-conf, Ethan. Oh. So it's in fact there's probably more React speakers there than Vue speakers.
Oh,
you should totally come. Kent C. Dodds is going to be there.
Oh, Kent's going to be there.
Doesn't get any more React than that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I wonder if the remix guys will be there too, like Mike. Yeah. Man, that sounds like a fun trip. Jeff, let's see if we can finish.
We'll put in some. If there's a CFP, we'll submit some stuff. See what sticks.
See if I can.
Yeah.
Well, Agent
we were
Conf.
also
Agent Conf is the
Agent Conf. Okay.
Agent Conf. Okay.
And I know there's a Vue Conf, right? Maybe happening in the US in New Orleans. Are you going to be there by chance?
I am going to be there. So yeah, are you going?
I think we're going to try. I'm going to try for sure.
That would be
not too far from
trip.
either. Yeah. That was really close in between Fran and I geographically. So I'm definitely going to submit a presentation and see if I can get the company to
Oh, it's May 24th.
send me out there. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna try. I don't. The thing is, I'm not. I could speak at a React Conf, but I don't know anything about Vue. But that gives me time to learn it real quick.
Yeah.
Enough to have my company pay for me to go to. Either way,
we'll set up a booth or something.
Here's the thing too, y'all. And yeah, Daniel, it'd be cool to meet you. You seem like a cool dude too, and we can grab a beer and stuff. But like, what I was gonna say is, I'm in Austin, Texas, and it's a 45-minute. I can hop on a plane and be in New Orleans in 45 minutes. So
okay,
even if WP says, "Hey, we're not gonna pay you, but you should go," but Jeff can speak there, I'll meet y'all there and I'll pay my way there. It's cheap. So
cool.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay, let's make it happen.
That'll be sick.
Awesome.
Man. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Daniel, cool. I appreciate you coming on. Man, it's super grateful for you to come on and give us some more deep dive nerdiness into the Vue and Nuxt ecosystem and world, because that's something I believe we're lacking on our developer relations site for Headless WordPress here. So appreciate it. Yes. Many thanks.
So much gratitude.
Yes. Thank you so much, man.
A real pleasure. Thanks.
All right. Awesome. Cheers, y'all.
Thanks for tuning in to the Headless WP podcast. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and give us a share or a like on whatever platform you're listening on. And be sure to keep in touch with the WP Engine Developer Relations team on Twitter, Discord, or through our website. Thanks for listening.